Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered to transform your marketing game? You are in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jem Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Now, what works and what doesn't certainly is an ever-moving target in marketing. But the way that we do marketing is vastly different today from a few years ago, maybe even a few months ago. David Meerman Scott has continuously chronicled the change in his book, now in the 9th edition, The New Rules of Marketing and PR, and he's here to help us understand that new rule book. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, thanks very much, Jen. It's so good to be here.
So good to have you on. I'm really excited to get into this topic because it's so true. It is such a moving target of what works and what doesn't, and even from day to day or business to business. And so, navigating that can be a real challenge for marketers and non-marketers alike.
Absolutely. I mean, the 9th edition of the same book, I first came out in 2007,
Wow.
back when the first edition didn't even have Twitter. And because Twitter had only just started at the time that I was starting to write the first edition of the book. And now here we are 17 years later, and we're talking about artificial intelligence and marketing and all sorts of different topics. And not only did Twitter not exist in the first edition, but now Twitter is called X. So you never know what's going to change in the world of marketing, right, Jen?
Yeah, for sure. You really don't know. So when did you first notice that the rules were changing in marketing? Was it in 2007 when you were writing that book, or even before that?
No, it was quite a bit before that. It was actually in the very late 1990s and into the early 2000s. I was lucky that I had essentially what I call an unfair advantage into the new rules of marketing, as I've called them now, because I worked in the early part of my career for financial information companies like Dow Jones and Reuters. And this was pre-web. So I say it was an unfair advantage because I understood what electronic information was. And these are the tools that are used for bond traders and stock traders and so on. And so I understood electronic information. I knew how people used news and data to trade stocks and bonds because I was in marketing at these companies. And so in the late 1990s, early 2000s, I said, wow, there's a better way to market, because I saw that the web was a metaphor around publishing content as opposed to what all marketers thought it was, which was an advertising vehicle. So while everybody was saying, oh, we should do banner ads and we should do this and we should do that are focused on advertising, what I started to talk about was, no, we should be doing content. We should create great websites. We should create fabulous email newsletters, photographs, all kinds of other interesting information. Now, this was pre-social media. So we didn't have that available to us, but it was in the early days of blogging. It was in the early days of email newsletters and websites, and it was actually pre-Google, but you could get found in Alta Vista and Yahoo and some of the other earlier search engines. And it worked. It worked really well. Yet a lot of people were pushing back on this idea because they were told by the powers that be in the advertising community that the right way to go about generating interest on the web was to spend a whole lot of money on ads. So I found out about this a long time ago and started to talk about it. I started my blog in 2004. That was pretty early, and started writing what became the New Rules of Marketing and PR in 2005.
Wow. I mean, it is really right time, right place. It's very Malcolm Gladwell outliers moments for you, like, that experience. And I'm so it's so interesting that at that time, I mean, at that time I was in college studying marketing, and what I studied is not what I do today, which is so interesting.
Exactly, because what you were studying at the time is what almost everybody was doing at the time,
Right.
which was understanding the four P's and then creating advertising campaigns, magazines, radio, television, newspaper, billboards, all different forms of advertising. And what I recognized is that wasn't the best approach to reach people on the web. What was a much better approach was creating the kind of content that would be found in the search engines, creating the kind of website that would educate and inform people. And it was super fun to talk about those things because for most people, it was a kind of a radical idea. And I was, you say right time, right place. The first edition of the New Rules of Marketing and PR came out in the summer of 2007. Also, right around the same time, almost the same week, the very first iPhone, the iPhone 1 came out. Right around that time, Facebook transitioned from being only available for students with a .edu address to being available to anybody. Twitter had just launched and was starting to gain traction. Podcasting had essentially just started, although it was very convoluted to create podcast episodes and distribute them. But I was fortunate that I was super early with the ideas, and at the same time, the technology was evolving. So all of a sudden, my book hits the market, The New Rules of Marketing and PR, the first edition, and it was the book that people said, wow, this guy is articulating what's going on right now. And that first edition sold a whole bunch of copies. Now in the ninth edition, it's in 29 languages, half a million copies in the various languages so far. But it was fortunate that I was early, and it was because I understood that marketing is about creating content, that marketing is about understanding how people buy, and then when you understand how they buy and what are their problems, that you create the content that will be very interesting for them and educate and inform them. And there's tons of things that happened since 2007 in the first edition. Social media, real-time marketing, a concept I invented called newsjacking, and of course now the artificial intelligence revolution. So lots of things that happened since then. But at that time, it really was a new world, and it's still a new world for different reasons.
Yeah, for sure. And now, what do you think? I mean, that's such an interesting thing that you just mentioned about, sort of understanding customers and what they're looking for, and then creating content that is going to engage them and help them solve a problem. Like, what are some of the rules maybe that have not changed in marketing throughout that time? Like, what are the things to keep really keep focusing on that's going to make all the other stuff successful? Because things like Facebook launch, and whether you're doing ads or content, like, those are tactics or channels that you want to get your message out, but what stays the same?
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is over 9 editions, 17 years, the strategies haven't changed.
Hmm.
What has changed has been the tools and the technologies, and the tactics, but the strategy hasn't changed. So when I originally came up with the idea, I called it the New Rules of Marketing and PR because I clearly saw that there were old rules and there was the new rules. The old rules of marketing and public relations and selling, the old rules were that you had to buy attention by spending a whole lot of money on advertising, or you had to bug members of the media, traditional forms of public relations, which is trying to do media outreach to get members of the media to write about you because it was deemed important to be in the magazines, radio, television, and newspapers, and so on. Because at that time, people thought you couldn't create your own content. So the only way to get your content out there was through somebody else's media. And then another way to generate attention was to have a sales force. And, whether you were knocking on physical doors or you had a physical store, or you use telephone sales or whatever it might be, those were forms of generating attention. And when you're talking about the buying attention, it's buying magazine ads, it's buying trade show booth space, it's buying direct mail lists and sending postcards to people. And my new rules are: no, understand your buyers. Create great content on the web, because people are looking to solve problems by going on the web and searching and finding companies and organizations and websites that can help them, and then become interested in products or services that way. And so those strategies have not changed over 17 years. The tactics have, but the strategies haven't changed. And there's another strategy I continually see people making a mistake on, even today, 17 years later, and that is, so many organizations continue to really focus on their own products and services. And that's a natural thing. If you're an entrepreneur and you've got a product and a service that you've created within your company, it's your baby. I get it. You want to talk about it. And people who've gone through the traditional marketing like you did when you were in school, they talked about how you should market your product, how you should market your service. And so most people had been steeped in this focus on, I've got to create content about my product. I've got to generate attention for my product. It's all about my product. They jump up and down, buy my product, buy my product. But in fact, most people don't care about products. What they care about themselves, and they care about solving their problems. So that strategy hasn't changed in 17 years. It's much better to understand buyers. I call them buyer personas. People call them target markets or whatever, but your buyer personas, understanding deeply who your buyers are, what their problems are, what words and phrases they use, so you can generate the attention with them by creating the content they'll need, is a way different strategy than just talking endlessly about what you do, what your company does, and what your products are.
You are preaching to the choir over here. I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that's where a lot of companies get it wrong, is just talking too much about, this is what we do, and let me tell you all about us. And I say this all the time. I'm like, no offense, but nobody cares. People don't care about what you do. They care about what's in it for me. And that's the best way to communicate that, is to have content about your expertise and to add value at every interaction. And creating content that's going to add value can only happen if you understand what's of value to your audience. It seems actually quite simple when you say it that way, but a lot of companies do struggle with that. Why do you think that is?
Partly because the way they were educated, because you mentioned that when you went to school, that's how you were taught. And partly because of the bosses. If the boss in a company is like, oh, we've got to talk about our products, they're so wonderful. So it can be very difficult sometimes to just break out of that and say, it's not about the products, it's about creating value for these people that we're trying to reach. And it takes a leap of faith. It really does take a leap of faith to suggest that if I educate somebody about a topic, that they will then perhaps, when they need a product or service around that topic, come to us when they do it. So let me give you a little story around that. As we're doing this, I know many of you are live as you're watching this, but if you're watching the recording, last month, September 2024, I took a sabbatical. I took the entire month off, and I hiked the Long Trail, which is 273 miles, the length of the state of Vermont, I started in the north at the Canada border and hiked all the way 273 miles south to the Massachusetts border. It's 68,000 feet vertical elevation gain, which is a little more than 2 times Mount Everest. And I completed it in 26 days. But I had planned that journey over a couple of years. I knew I wanted to do it. I blocked it in my calendar, but there's a lot of things I needed to know. What kind of gear did I need? What kind of backpack? What kind of tent? What kind of sleeping bag? How was I going to cook my food? How was I going to communicate to people even if I was out of cell phone range? How was I going to make sure I was on the right trail? Where was I going to sleep? How many days did I need to rest along the way? All these things I had to learn. So what did I do? I do what many people do. I went onto the web and I said, ultralight backpacking tips, whatever I typed into there. And where did I end up? I ended up on some company websites. For example, REI, which is an outfitter. There happens to be an REI near me, which was great because I spent a lot of money there because the REI has created some fabulous videos, some fabulous text and photo-based content with backpacking basics. How to choose a sleeping bag, how to choose a tent, all of the things I needed to know because I was a novice 2 years ago and I needed to learn. And I did some practice hikes 2 years ago and last year to get to the point where I was prepared this year to go into the wilderness for an entire month. And it was a fabulous experience. It would not have been a fabulous experience without having been educated by these various companies and their content. And I then did business with many of them, purchased their gear. Another company called Z-Packs. It's a small business out of Florida, and they make very lightweight tents and other equipment. I bought a tent from them. It was expensive. It was like $700. But they were the company that educated me about how you can best optimize for lightweight, but still have a tent that can keep you dry in the rain or can keep the bugs out if it's a buggy night. So that's just one example, and I'm just one person. That was just one thing in my life. But that's the way that people are buying products and services today, not from the company that says we have the best backpacking gear in the world, and not from the company that buys the ads that try to induce you to buy their gear. And the basic idea there is they understood me as a buyer persona. Now, I'm not sure if they use that language, but that doesn't really matter because they did understand me as a buyer persona. Because when I went on to Z-Pac's website, when I went on to Hyperlight, which is another company I bought some products from, website, when I went on to the REI website, and when I went on to some other independent sites, like one called Trek, I felt as if they knew who I was, that they understood me, that I was somebody who was ready for a long distance backpacking trip, but still needed to learn about the gear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that what the journey that you just described is so important because you weren't looking for, I want to buy a specific product.
Yeah.
You actually didn't know what products you needed. So the thing that showed you those products you needed was the videos, the blog articles, here's the 3 things you can't live without on your hike, right? And so you went in asking questions and you got answers, not products.
Yeah, I mean there were a few things I knew I needed. I knew I needed a tent and a sleeping bag and a backpack, right? Simple stuff. But I didn't know in some cases, the product I needed. Okay, I need to eat. Oh gosh, okay, what does that involve? I need to communicate even out of cell phone range. Oh my gosh, what does that involve? And I ended up getting a product made by Garmin, which is a satellite communications device. It's called an InReach Mini 2 is the model. Little tiny 3-ounce device that I can communicate via the satellite network even when I'm outside of cell phone range. I had no clue what that was, but doing the research, I found the alternatives, what's possible, and I chose one and I went with it.
Yeah, I love that. And that's such like you were saying before, that's the rule that doesn't change. If you can
Exactly.
demonstrate that you can solve a problem for your audience and that you understand your audience enough to know what their problem is, then the sales and the product, the adoption will come, as long as you do those other things properly. And sort of the different ways that you get that in front of those people might change, the channels, the tactics, but it's all about creating content that's going to solve a problem for your consumers.
Exactly right. And it doesn't matter what kind of product or service or idea that you're marketing as well. I mean, some people will say, oh, well, that's obvious, David, because you're buying high-end backpacking gear and that lends itself to content creation. Well, I would say no. I think most products and services do. So right now I'm speaking to you from a video studio in my home. I've got 4 cameras. It's super cool. I set it up in March of 2020, and you know why? COVID hit.
Yeah.
All of my speaking engagements were canceled. So I started to do virtual talks. I needed to have a studio to do them in. And I went through the same process, and I needed to buy cameras and lights and a switcher to go from one camera to the other. And it was super great to be able to do that. There's an image of my studio for those of you who are watching, not just listening. And again, the same idea. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to do the research. So business to business or business to consumer or professional services or nonprofits or government agencies or rock bands. I mean, you name it. And these strategies work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think it matters the product, the service, the audience. It's, solving a problem across the board. That's the difference between the more successful companies and the less successful companies. And I'm curious, like what some of the, so those are the things that stay the same, right? But over the years, over the 14, did we say 14 years, 19 years?
17.
17 years that you've been kind of writing revisions and new additions for this book. What are some of the bigger changes that you've seen happen over that time?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the most obvious is that the different social networks have changed.
Mm-hmm.
So Twitter didn't exist when I was writing the first edition. Facebook was only for students when I was writing the first edition. So every time there's a new social network of note, Instagram pops on the scene, for example, TikTok pops on the scene, for example, I need to talk about it. One social network called Google Plus, you may remember, popped onto the scene and then disappeared because Google closed it down. So I saw the whole life cycle of Google Plus. I think it was the 3rd or 4th edition where it was launched and the 7th or 8th edition where it disappeared. So those are things are constantly changing. Every edition I have new stories that I write about, which are always interesting to me. But one of the most significant, the two most significant changes over the years that have been fascinating and literally have transformed marketing. One of them occurred about a dozen years ago, and that was the switch to real-time communications. So anybody who was a marketer 15 years ago or earlier than that might remember that when you updated a website, it took Google and the other search engines a month or even longer to update. If you had a blog and you pushed the button and created a blog post, it often took a long time for the search engines to update and find your blog post. The web was not real time 15 years ago or longer ago. And then all of a sudden it became real time. Twitter started. Facebook, when you updated your status, instantly changed and people were watching what became the news feed to see what was going on. And then Google went to real time, and that was really significant. Very few people understood at the time how significant it was that the whole web is going real time. And I understood it instantly because I mentioned earlier, I worked in the early part of my career for real-time financial information service companies. So at that time I said, wow, we now have at our fingertips the same tools that people were paying thousands of dollars for just a couple of years earlier on their bond trading networks. So I invented a concept I called newsjacking, which is the idea of understanding the news and what's going on, and then creating real-time content in order to put your ideas into the marketplace of ideas. And this works great because if you're watching the news or you're watching the trends or you're following what's going on in the world, and there's some kind of development in an area that you have expertise in, you have an opportunity to create content around that expertise that can educate and inform people when the time is right. I'll give you an example. So I talked about this idea of newsjacking in many of my speeches. And back in January of 2020, I was talking about newsjacking at a Tony Robbins event. I speak at Tony Robbins Business Mastery events. And a gentleman named Russell Alexander was in the room. He runs a law firm out of Canada, and his law firm specializes in family law. So things like divorce and child custody cases. And I was talking about newsjacking. When news breaks, you got to jump in and you'll be able to generate attention because your expertise is in demand. And then just 2 months later, COVID hit. So Russell Alexander, lawyer out of outside of Toronto in Canada, created the Ontario Divorce Network. He created the Canada Divorce content site. He went out there and he became the expert on the entire planet on the ramifications of COVID-19 and family law. And because there's lots of different things that are going on with COVID-19 and family law. For example, if a divorced couple share custody of a child, one of the parents wants the child to go to school in person. The other parent wants the child to stay home and do virtual school. What does the law say about that? So Russell wrote all about that. The bottom line is that he grew like crazy. And he had to hire 5 new lawyers just to handle all the cases that he was getting. He was on television news. He was quoted in the newspapers. He literally became the expert in COVID-19 and family law for the country of Canada. If you Google that term at the time, he would pop up on the first page, often number 1. So that's the idea of real-time communications, the idea of something I called newsjacking, which is, by the way, now in the Oxford English Dictionary and references me as the founder of the newsjacking movement, which is super cool. And then the next thing, which we all know because we're all living it, that has transformed marketing is artificial intelligence. And I've been focused on AI and marketing now for about 5 years. Have been talking and writing and speaking about it for about 5 years. But it was really about 2 years ago with the launch of ChatGPT where the rest of the marketing world said, oh my gosh, there's something going on here. Artificial intelligence is super interesting. And so that is now the new frontier of what we should all be paying attention to. And in my mind, what's most interesting about AI is how you can take your own data, whatever data that might be, and use AI to create content or derivatives of content that you can use. That becomes really interesting. I'm not really a fan of using AI to create content on public internet data because that's a rehash of what someone else has already done. But taking your own content and running it through AI engines to create derivatives of your own content becomes super interesting. So for example, if you've got, like you, Jen, you've got a podcast, you've got 50 or something episodes of the podcast. You can take every episode, transcribe them using one AI engine, run them then through another AI engine to create a series of blog posts or a series of social media posts from your own content that you've already created. AI can help you to generate even more valuable content. So those are the things, the significant things that have changed. The whole web going real time about 15 years ago, and now artificial intelligence bursting onto the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. You're giving away all our AI secrets over here, David.
Yeah, well, they're not really secrets anymore because there's so many people talking about it. But you know what I did? I created my own AI bot, and I've got 20 years of blog posts. I started blogging in 2004. 20 years of blog posts, and the text of 6 of my books. It's a lot of data. It's like 6,000 words. I mean, sorry, 6 million words of data. Put it into a proprietary private database with an AI engine over the top of it, and I can query my own brain essentially.
Mhm.
I love that. It's great. I'm like, I don't remember if I've ever written about the auto industry in Australia, so I can just ask myself using my own AI engine, searching my own published data to see if I've ever done that, and then I can bring that up. So that's a real transformational thing for marketers.
Absolutely. And I think that the way you describe it is so important because that's something that I think a lot of marketers and non-marketers are doing wrong with AI is they're using it to generate content from scratch from the internet, which
Yeah.
is not unique and not doesn't have your expertise or your perspective layered into it. And that's when all of the content on the internet starts to flatten. It
Yeah,
starts.
and it doesn't have your voice either. It
Yes,
doesn't have your own unique personality.
exactly. And, I think that using AI to restructure the content that you've already created is a great time saver for sure. And take blog content you've already written and turn it into, smaller snippets that you might want to use on social media or things like that. But starting with content that you've generated, that you've created is such a critical step to using AI properly. But we are at such like a pivotal point in marketing, I mean, in the world with AI. And I think people are still sort of navigating exactly how to use it. In the best way, but I think that's the tip, right? Is like you still need to generate your own content in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
Sometimes
I
it's
think
really
I
pressing
think
time.
so. And it can also help with research because imagine if you could take every single sales call that your sales team has had over the past, call it 5 years, take those recordings, drop them into an AI engine to create a huge database of all of your salespeople's conversations with potential customers, and then ask AI after those have been transcribed to be text to come up with the 100 most important features that people are interested in the next version of your product. I mean, that used to take a gazillion hours of time to figure out something like that. And now AI can help you to do that. Or take a look at all of your customer services queries that you've gotten in the last few years and find out what people think about different parts of your products and services and how you can fix them. So it's a number of different uses of AI if you begin to think about how you can effectively use them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so now those are some of the big, huge, earth-shattering changes that happen or have happened over time. Like, how do you recommend navigating the smaller changes that are happening all the time? How do you test and learn these new things that emerge? You mentioned Google Plus or, Circles or Clubhouse or, these things that come and go. How do you have some freedom to experiment with this stuff? And how do you focus on that and make sure you're not also like running after that shiny object?
Yeah, Clubhouse was an interesting one, wasn't it?
It was.
For about 2 months, everyone was talking about Clubhouse, and no one
Yeah.
talks about it anymore. My recommendation always is to focus on a few things and do them really well, rather than try to do too much. So I myself, I love to have conversations like this on other people's shows, other people's podcasts. I don't have my own. I've been blogging for 20 years, so my blog is important to me, and that's something I focus on. I do videos here and there. That's okay. I'm not on TikTok. I am on Instagram. I am on LinkedIn. I am on X, but I'm not on many of the other social networks. So my recommendation always is to focus on a few things, do a few things really well, But don't worry about, as you say so eloquently, chasing that bright shining object. I also think that you need to know, for you personally and also for your organization, your company, what are the media that makes the most sense? Now, I'm a writer, I write books, so I'm a text guy. I like to write. Other people can focus on video. Other people might focus on audio content or photographs or graphics, or there's all sorts of different types of content to focus on. You don't necessarily have to be great at all of them. I have many people who say to me, I don't know how I can do content, create content and do marketing because I'm not a writer. Doesn't matter. Use video, use audio. There's all sorts of different ways to get out there. So I would suggest definitely focusing on those several ideas.
Yeah, that's a good tip. You don't have to be everywhere and do everything. And if you want to experiment with something new and see if it works for you, then I always recommend measuring that. Have some, really key success metrics in place before you embark on a new initiative, and then see if it works or not. Don't spend a ton of time, and don't do it just because everybody else is doing it. That doesn't
Absolutely.
mean it's the right thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking through these rules with us and how they've changed over time. I want to point out that some of the people in the audience today, we had a lot of chit chat in the audience today.
Good. I haven't been able to see it, but that's good.
That's okay. You can go back and read through the comments later, but Justin commented, fun fact that David, your book has a 5-star rating on Amazon and over 157 comments from folks who love it.
Nice.
So head over and...
That's probably just one of the editions, because I think there's well over 1,000 in the various editions.
Yeah.
I'll add one last thought, and that is marketing should be fun. So many people dread the idea of marketing. Oh my gosh, it's time to do marketing. But if you make it fun and you focus on the things that are fun for you and for your audience, you probably will be more effective.
I love that. That's a great place to end it. Marketing should be fun. I hope you all have fun doing your marketing today. Thank you so much, David, for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.